OK, let's return to our top story now, the conflict in the Middle East. I'm joined by Robert Danin, a former US Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Near Eastern Affairs, who also worked for the Office of the Quartet, the group consisting of the US, Russia, the EU and the UN, formed to deal with the Middle East. Good to get his thoughts this evening. Thanks very much for being with us. A desperately worrying situation then. Israel massing troops on the Gaza border. Do you think a ground offensive is inevitable now?
I wouldn't say anything is inevitable right now. Clearly, the Israeli cabinet has decided to authorize the possibility of a ground offensive. But at the same time, we were seeing intensive diplomatic efforts afoot to try to preclude such a step, including efforts by the United States that are increasing to try to head off such an invasion.
Yeah, I've just seen in the last few moments, actually, the US Secretary of State saying that the US is working hard to encourage all sides to stand down and return to calm. I suppose the question is, what exactly can the US do? Given the last administration, it's very unlikely that they're going to be able to get much out of the Palestinians, is it?
Well, this is not a new situation. Unfortunately, we've had 4 rounds of fighting between Israel and Hamas over Gaza in the last almost more than 10 years. So this follows a certain pattern. Right now, you've had the President of the United States speak to Prime Minister Netanyahu and other leaders in the region. You've had the National Security Advisor and the Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, all talking to their counterparts in the region. There's a lot of backroom diplomacy also taking place in which they'll be talking to other allies that are trying to work on the Palestinian side. And that means primarily Egypt and Qatar, who have a dialogue with Hamas. So I think we are seeing signs of a lot of frenetic diplomatic efforts to try to head this off.
The civil unrest is a real worry, isn't it, where Arabs and Jewish communities have lived closely together, but now we're seeing terrible unrest on the streets. What do you make of that? Because there has been talk of a civil war. We're seeing footage of it now. I mean, really distressing. Where does that take things?
Well, that really is a new element in this equation. We haven't seen that before, in which fighting taking place between the Israeli army and Hamas over Gaza, while at the same time in the home front, that is within Israel, civil unrest and actual violence between the Jewish and Arab populations of Israel at the same time. And so you're seeing among the Israeli security officials talk about trying to mobilize civil defense to try to quiet that down. And I think that will play a bit of a restraining factor in Israeli decision-making. We've also had reports in the last several hours of a few rockets that were fired from southern Lebanon into Israel. The initial reports seem to be that it may not have been Hezbollah, but the point is that this is a very volatile situation in which you could have violence erupting. Well, you already have it now on 2 fronts, that is in Gaza as well as inside Israel. And if there's now a new front that opens up across from Lebanon, then it just makes it much more complicated.
What's the objective for both sides here? What's the Hamas objective and what's the Israeli objective? Because sometimes it's hard to tell, isn't it?
Very much so. And that is the key question, really, that one has to ask. And I think for Hamas, they've already achieved their objective. They fired rockets at Jerusalem while demonstrations were taking place there. And by doing so, what they did was they took leadership within the Palestinian community to say, we are acting in the name of the Palestinians, while President Mahmoud Abbas, the president of the Palestinian Authority, is doing nothing. And so within the internal Palestinian struggle, the Hamas is seen to be actually doing something and taking leadership in resisting Israel. And so by launching rockets at Jerusalem, they achieved their objective, which was to show that they can do that, that Israel can be caught by surprise, and that they are a force to be reckoned with, which is why they're keen now to see a ceasefire quickly. Israel, in turn, is trying to rob Hamas of that psychological victory by using this time to really decapitate the leadership, to try to do as much damage to Hamas's capabilities in as much time and as quickly as it can, because the Israelis know that they're in a race against time, that the international community is going to try to restrain them. And so the question then for the Israelis that they have to answer is, what will constitute success? What are their clear objectives? And while reducing Hamas's capabilities, hurting its leadership, these are vague objectives. There have to be more precise ones, and we have yet to really see articulated a clear one. You have an Israeli debate taking place which says we need to do as much damage as we can, because if we don't, we're just going to have to be back in there in another 6 months.
Yeah.
And I can imagine that part of the debate that's going on, or the discussion that's going on between Israel and their American counterparts in other countries, is that very question. I'm sure the Americans are saying, what are you trying to do? How much time do you need? When is this going to end? And how is this going to end?
Yeah, all questions that we would all like answers to. Robert Danin, great to speak to you. Thank you very much for your analysis.
Thank you.